The Pistons hired coach Cade Cunningham's about to sign a max extension, and day one of free agency is in the books. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more on today's episode of Pistons Intellect.
Lane, skies a jam. Dynamite dunk and the crowd loves it.
Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_3on3. You can also follow us on Instagram at Pistons_Intellect. If you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. Now, we have a huge show today with plenty going on. I'm just recording this probably 10 minutes after Paul George has just signed with the 76ers, which I'll talk more about and how that affects the Pistons towards the end of the show. But I think where I want to start today is the news around the Pistons kind of hiring a coach, which sort of come out of nowhere. This morning, in the early hours of the morning for me, Woj from ESPN reported that the Pistons are signing JB Bickerstaff to a 5-year deal, and Bickerstaff, for those that don't know, was let go by the Cavs this past season. But before I get into some of his numbers with the Cavs, I just wanted to talk about my immediate reaction. And like I said on my last episode, and it's normally the case with this kind of breaking news, I'm probably always a few hours late just because a lot of this news breaks around 2 a.m. in the morning for me, which is normally around the afternoon for my friends over in Detroit. But yeah, when I woke up this morning and saw it, I was a little bit shocked because Bickerstaff for me was kind of the last coach I had on my list. Not that it was a long list, but to throw out some names, I had kind of James Borrego, who I spoke about on the last episode, withdrew his name, but he was kind of towards the top. And then I had guys like Chris Quinn, Micah Nori, as well as Sean Sweeney, some other first-name head coaches. So a guy like Bickerstaff, who has been a head coach in the NBA at 3 previous stops, is coming off a season where he was fired, albeit he has had some success with the Cavs. But I didn't expect the Pistons to bring – this was kind of the last kind of coach I wanted the Pistons to get, if I'm being completely honest. I think there's some positives to Bickerstaff, and I've spoken to some Cavs people today, and I've heard some good stuff. So I'm not completely negative on this, but I just in terms of the resume and the type of coach I was hoping for, Bickerstaff is kind of, like I said, last on my list, and I was a lot more interested, probably like most of the fan base, in a head coach who is looking for their first opportunity after being an assistant for a long time. But nonetheless, Bickerstaff is the coach. He signed a 5-year deal. We don't know the value of that yet, unless I've missed it somewhere. I didn't really see how much it costs, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest, because none of this goes towards the cap anyway. It'd just be interesting to see after last offseason the Pistons handing out a historical contract to Monty Williams. But in terms of Bickerstaff's resume, I'm just going to go through the stuff with the Cavs. He was a head coach with the Rockets for a season or two, maybe, which I don't think went too well from memory. That was in like the 2016-17 season. I think he took over as kind of a caretaker coach. And then, yeah, he didn't last too long before Mike D'Antoni came in and took over that Rockets team with Harden and Chris Paul. But then he went on to Memphis, I believe, which I didn't actually look up the record, but his most recent stop was with the Cavs, where he spent 4.5 seasons. His first season there with the Cavs, he took over from John Beilein, which I think was in the 2019-2020 season. And then I'm not really going to count that season because he took over as caretaker, and then he got the job, and his first full season was in 2021. And since then, he coached 4 full seasons. His record with the Cavs is 170 wins to 159 losses. He's had most recently 2 playoff appearances with the Cavs. And I think in 21 and 22, they actually made the play-in games, but they lost. I think they lost both games after finishing like 6th or 7th in the East. But past 2 seasons, they've been to the playoffs. And In 2023, they lost to the Knicks in the first round, which was a pretty rough series. They got exposed offensively, and the Knicks, I think, beat them in 5 or 6 games. And this past postseason, their first round, they got through the first round, then they lost to Boston in the semifinals in, I think it was 5 games. They actually won game 2 on the road behind a big performance from Donovan Mitchell, but ultimately Mitchell went out injured. I think he was listed out for game 4, and then game 5 was a wash. So in talking to some Cavs fans, I actually work with a huge Cavs fan who's very plugged in and watches every game and is a huge Cavs fan. And talking to some people, these are just some quotes I've gotten across the day. So one person said, he's a great defensive coach and the players will love him. He's always had strong relationships with his players and he's good at development. Where he struggles in running a modern day offense that'll work in today's NBA. He struggles in running a modern day offense that works in today's NBA, and his rotations also leave a lot to be desired as well. And then this person rounded out by saying, but when he took over the Cavs, we were a basket case. And each season under him, we had a better record. So he did lead us back to the playoffs. And past 2 seasons with the Cavs are like the first non-LeBron playoffs in like 40 years or something. So there is some value there. I think if the Pistons weren't coming off Monty Williams, I think the opinion on him would be a lot different. But I wanted to highlight some of the defensive numbers the Cavs had under Bickerstaff. And look, they had 2 of the best defensive big men in the league in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley for all 3 of these past seasons. But in the past 3 seasons, they've had the 7th best defense, the 1st best defense, and the 5th best defense. So consistently an elite defense. And then on offense, they were 16th this season, 7th the season before, which is actually quite good, and then 20th the season prior. So that past 2 seasons, I think the offense is kind of probably having a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who, say what you want about him, is an elite offensive player, as well as Garland, even though he's been injured. I think that helps prop up the offense a little bit, particularly when they finish 7th. But, if the Pistons get anything close to that, if they just had, a top 20 defense and a non-bottom 5 offense, I think this season they would win probably 25 to 30 games. So, I think the defensive stuff is really good. Kind of aligns with what Langdon spoke about with this team getting better on defense, with putting an emphasis on rim protection. And, obviously shooting is the other priority, but on the defensive end, I think Bickerstaff, he's shown with 2 rim protecting bigs, that he can put together I would say, close to elite defense consistently. So as long as Langdon can bring in the right talent, or at least just one rim protector, I feel like that'll help, as well as the Pistons. They've already got some strong perimeter defenders, I feel like. And I feel like Ron Holland's going to help a little bit there as a rookie, even if he has his mistakes. So, look, overall, I said in my reaction on Twitter, like, I'm not going to go crazy. I feel like from the most part, like, the fan base was a little bit upset with the hire, but I didn't see any obscene takes of people losing it. It's just kind of a bit of I think for me at least, like, I'm not getting too excited or too frustrated, particularly with coaching type things, until we see the product on court, which might annoy some people. But I want to, they've made a 5-year commitment to Bickerstaff. So there's no way the Pistons have back-to-back coaches on 5-year contracts fired in the first season. I don't even want to imagine that. So it feels like he's here for the long run. So it feels like we're going to have him for at least a few seasons. So hopefully he can start with that defense, and then the offense, we shall see. But they're kind of my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. But moving on, the second major thing today in terms of news for the Pistons was Cade's extension. Shams and James Edwards III reported earlier today that the Detroit Pistons and Cade Cunningham are discussing a 5-year, $226 million maximum Rookie extension, that would be the richest contract in franchise history. Now, nothing has been officially locked in. ESPN, Bobby Marks said that hasn't been signed yet, and there was a clarification in James's article that both sides are optimistic the deal will get done. But yeah, it hasn't officially been signed. But if it is, as you can see there, Cade will sign the biggest contract in franchise history, and I think he's worth it. I think if you don't sign him and you somehow lose him, then you're just going to be going back to the draft to find another Cade, because even if he's not a number one option, I think he's at least a number two option on a championship team, like truly. And I know the win-loss record, is horrible since he's been here. But whilst I think he clearly has a heap to prove as a player, particularly now that he's signing this contract, he needs to prove that he can at least win more than 14 games. I think last season, I was impressed with how Cade closed the season, but throughout that losing streak, there were moments where it felt like if you are truly a number one guy and an alpha, I don't think this team loses 28 games. As bad as the roster is, like surely there's a game you can just drag your team across the line, but maybe the coaching was that bad and maybe the roster was that bad and just the whole thing was, unless you're LeBron James or one of those sort of top 8 guys, like it's going to be tough for any young player to come in there and win a game. Like we saw Wemby struggle this season. So whilst I still have plenty of questions about Cade and how good he can be. I think we just, max play. This is just how the NBA works now. Your young players, they sign the max if they're anywhere near worth it, and you get them locked in for another 5 years. I mean, if Cade does sign this means he's locked in with Detroit for another 6 years because the extension wouldn't kick in until the season after next. And look, last season, he averaged 23 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds. He got the field goal percentage up to 45% and 3-point percentage to 35%. And both of those were kind of trending upwards. I felt like he closed the season with 3 30-point games all back to back. And just, while it was disappointing not to see him close out the season, ultimately none of those games, those last 8 or so games didn't matter. And yeah, I think he took his game truly to another level this season. Like in my mind, there's no question he's kind of a number 2 guy. Like now it's just about, is he a 1A, 1B? Or, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people still believe he is that true superstar number 1. So I still see him being a top 15 player in this league. I'm not sure if he can get to that top 5 to 7 range, but I think that we probably would have seen a bit more if that was the case. But look, he's only kind of just finished his second season in the NBA. So still so much growth. So I'm extremely happy to see this because I was starting to just get a little bit curious about what's going on. Just because the Pistons have a whole new front office, basically, and whilst it would seem ridiculous to move on from Cade, there was part of me that thought the longer this goes on, it kind of wouldn't surprise me if maybe the front office just want to fully reset this thing and bring in their own young talent, move Cade, get a stack of future picks. But it sounds like that's not happening. But ultimately, I think this deal is good, and I can't wait for it to get fully signed, sealed, and done because, yeah, I just think, like I just said to start, if you move on from Cade, you're kind of just going back to the draft to find another player of his caliber. So that's all my thoughts on it. I'm glad to see this being reported. And like I said, hopefully in the next few days it gets fully signed and, we can officially say Cade's a Piston for the next 6 years, or if he's not, doesn't request a trade. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I've seen some conflicting opinions online, but I feel like most people who watch this show will be happy to see Cade getting close to an agreement there. And then the final thing, free agency started today. I think a lot of Pistons fans were just refreshing Twitter all day. In Australia, I had work, but at 6 p.m. Eastern for me is normally 8 a.m. I was in the office at work today. I was checking Twitter, don't get me wrong, but part of me was kind of glad that I was occupied with work, because otherwise I'd be sitting there like everyone else, just refreshing Twitter, waiting for the Pistons. So in terms of Pistons moves, nothing happened today apart from the report around Cade's extension. But I think what's important to note is the players that did get signed, the players that are now no longer available for the Pistons to sign, players we've spoke about on this channel and in the community. And I'm just going to list them off here. The first one, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, signed with the Orlando Magic for 3 years, $22 million, or 66 million across 3 years. I know a lot of fans were upset with that. I just kind of said on last episode, and I think this is a reality a lot we're going to face as Pistons fans. Like, no player who's come from a championship, who's won 2 championships, one with the Lakers, one with the Nuggets, is used to going to the playoffs every single year. It's going to be really hard to get them to Detroit, who just had the worst season in franchise history and one of the worst seasons of all time. No matter if the leadership changes, no matter who the coach is, why is someone of KCP's ilk going to want to come to the Pistons when I just don't think, with the amount of guards the Pistons have, they just signed Tim Hardaway Jr., they have Cade. Who knows what they're doing with Ivy? They're invested in Holland, who's going to play a lot at the 2, I feel like. Are you really going to put another... To get KCP, you're going to have to probably pay more than $20 million, because the Magic, at least they made the playoffs last year. They are on a full-blown upward trajectory. Like, you're going to have to pay him like 3 years, $80 million, or 3 years, 85. And then how much money do you have in your backcourt now? Because KCP is kind of a true shooting guard to me. Sure, he can defend other positions, he can defend point guards. Probably don't want him defending bigger wings, but yeah, I didn't really see that one happening for those reasons. And then the next one, which was a real kick in the guts of Pistons fans, was Najee Marshall signing with the Dallas Mavs as free agency was closing. I think off the top of my head, it was 3 years, $27 million, so roughly $9 million a season. Yeah, he had kind of become the sneaky player every Pistons fan wanted the Pistons to sign. Now, I honestly am not trying to sound like I'm drinking copium or whatever, but like, once again, after I saw the Pistons draft the way they drafted, and they drafted Najee Marshall, who's a wing, and they drafted Ron Holland, who's a wing, and Bobby Clintman. They have Asar Thompson, and Holland and Thompson in particular are going to play a lot of minutes at the 3. Both can't shoot, and both won't be able to shoot for the definitely next season. And I would say it's going to take more than 2 to 3. So bringing a guy in, like, once I saw how the Pistons draft, bringing in Najee Marshall to me wasn't as much a priority. And that is because his 3-point shot, he shot 38% last season, which is a big tick, but it wasn't on the highest volume. And for 3 seasons prior, he shot 28% on like 2.5 attempts from 3. So I think the Pistons need to prioritize proven shooters. Now, I know that's very hard to find, but Najee Marshall to me is not a proven shooter. There is a very real possibility he comes to Detroit and say they pay him 3 years 35 or 3 years 30. There's a very real possibility he could shoot sub 30%. And now what do you have? You just have another big wing who's relatively athletic, who cannot shoot. So now you've got Ron Holland, Asar Thompson, and Najee Marshall. So don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have been mad if they signed him. But the way I saw the Pistons drafted, and with who they currently have on the wings, I'm not too upset they didn't get him. And maybe I'll cop some heat. But yeah, this one to me kind of hurt a little bit. And I haven't spoken about him a lot, but I thought it would have been a really good get. And that's Kelly Oubre Jr. He re-signed for 2 years, $16 million with 76ers. You know, I've been very in and out on him. Well, probably out on him, honestly. But I feel like he really he grew with the Hornets, and then last season with Philly, I think he really took another step into just a consistent contributor. He's a guy that will just give you 20 on any night, but more so, he's always willing to shoot, even if the percentages waver. He's good at attacking the rim. He's great size. He's like 6'7", and he's very disruptive. Loves getting steals. Loves pushing in transition. So 2 years, $16 million. I feel like maybe the Pistons he's a guy they could have offered surely 2 for 25, but Nonetheless, he signed. Jonas Valanciunas signed with the Wizards. Funnily enough, the Wizards have signed 2 centers and they drafted one since Troy Weaver got there a week ago. 3 years, 30 mil. So another guy who has been mentioning with the Pistons they didn't get. And then Chris Paul, which I don't think this is ever going to be a match, but he signed with the Spurs for 1 year, 10 million. So those are some names. I think there's some other lesser names that signed today, but those were the big names for today. For me, and I understand why Pistons fans are upset that the Pistons signed them, but now that, as I mentioned at the top, Paul George has just signed with Philadelphia, I feel like some dominoes are about to fall, because still available to Detroit is Isaiah Hartenstein, who Jake Fisher reported earlier today the Pistons are still very much interested in. Tobias Harris, who the Pistons are still very much interested in. And then the other 2 names I have here, these are just from my list, was Malik Beasley and Jalen Smith. Beasley's a guy, now that Marshall's off the board, Contagious off the board, Kelly Ray, I think Beasley would be a really nice get for this team. Kind of similar to Tim Hardaway Jr., but he's a little bit bigger, and a lot, like 4 or 5 years younger. And he just shot 42% from around 7 attempts. Like, he's about 6'6", 6'7". You can put him alongside Asar. You can put him alongside Ron Holland. I feel like he would kind of fit really nicely with this team now. And then Jalen Smith, who I spoke about in the last episode, who's another 40% three-point shooter, but he's probably more of a backup 5 or true kind of 4-man. So I feel like I'm not sure what's happening with Isaiah Stewart, but if Stewart's gone, I think Smith would be a great pickup because they're going to need some spacing at the 5 position. So they're kind of the names left. And where this all brings us to is, will the Pistons actually sign anyone? I'm kind of hoping, like I just said, now that Paul George has signed, some dominoes will start to fall and things will open up, because teams that might have been saving that cap space for Paul George now might look at Isaiah Hartenstein, and not that that's necessarily an awesome thing for the Pistons, but I think it just opens up the whole free agency, and I think we could see a lot more movement tomorrow. But it truly feels like the Pistons, as Trajan Langdon said the whole time, are going to be a dumping ground. I think that's my takeaway from today. And look, maybe I'll reassess this tomorrow, but yeah, it feels like the Pistons, there's a very real possibility they don't get Hartenstein, they don't get Tobias Harris, they don't get Malik Beasley, they don't get any other free agent you might have hoped for, and they could end up with a Zach LaVine if the picks are right. Or I've kind of still hopeful they end up with either Clint Capella or DeAndre Hunter. I think those 2 could really help this team. I'm not sure they'll get any assets necessarily in terms of picks, because maybe for Hunter, Capella's expiring, so maybe they just take on that money and then maybe you get a second rounder. But because he's expiring, I don't see them getting a heap. And it feels like the Hawks now are going in the direction of well, we don't actually know what's going on with Trae Young, but I think they could maybe get something with DeAndre Hunter. But it feels like that's how the Pistons are going to mold their roster. Or there could just be some shock trade where Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duran are packaged, or who knows, Asar Thompson might be. Like, I don't think so, but yeah, who knows? It's interesting. I'd love to hear your predictions in the comments below, because yeah, Pistons today was a bit boring, a bit frustrating from a Pistons fan point of view, but it still feels like there's so many options available and it's going to be super interesting. So I'm going to wrap up today's show here. I'm going to be back tomorrow with another free agency recap, and I'll probably just be doing these each night until the Pistons roster is kind of set. So stick with me. I appreciate all the love. I love that the channel is continuing to growing, and I love hearing everyone's thoughts, opinions on the team, because we're in such an interesting, crazy time. Like, we've got a new GM, a whole new front office, basically. Just got a new coach. We don't know what's happening with the assistants. Like, there's so much still to play out. This whole franchise, in terms of the on-court product, is continuing to change each and every day. So stick with the channel, stick with me, and I'll be back tomorrow to hopefully recap an exciting day 2 with a roster that we can all be excited about. So until tomorrow, as always, go Pistons.